Alright, so now we're in the next step of this process, which is base raw extraction, into going into using dbt to transform these data sets into business reporting tables. And here we're going to go into this step right here, which is the base and raw extraction, section 1, source configuration. So this may seem optional, but I want to start out by a model implementation by specifying our data source configurations in a .yaml file, coinciding with our model directory, which is seen coming up right here. And we'll go into this process of creating the base, and later on we'll see stage and then more later on in the process as well. But, why should I care? Why should I go through this process of setting up these configurations right now? Well, here are my thoughts. Well, here are some cases where we have a reference to a table, QtDB.niceSchema, .customers, and then this is a specification of how in Snowflake we create tables through a database schema and then a table in several locations of your data model. However, what happens when you migrate to a new database due to poor naming conventions such as QtDB, niceSchema, customers to AwesomeDB, niceSchema, customers, and the predecessing table naming conventions with the database and schema naming conventions, all that's just everywhere, spread it out in our repository, which we just saw earlier on. And just imagine we didn't have like VS Code or something that does a quick replacement in as such in your command editor. It sounds like a big hassle of going through and parsing and finding these specified tables with their associated database and schema conventions, and it's just going to be a lot of hassle to make these edits to update to AwesomeDB, for example, as our database change from the predecessing naming convention, just QtDB. I guess I made this up. It's all pseudo naming conventions and not official to anything I produce professionally or personally. So quoting dbt source makes it possible to name and describe the data loaded into your warehouse by your extract and load tools. By declaring these tables as sources in dbt, you can then use the source function to help define the lineage of your data, test your assumptions about your source data, and calculate the freshness of your source data as well. So there's a little bit more we can do to enable source configurations just by naming it in our tables. There's also some functionality that we can enable with dbt with our source configurations as well, so to keep that in mind. So using sources, we configure our YAML file for specifying source table preferences in our upcoming model. This includes Snowflake table references and aliases as well. So now let's see how we can use these sources to specify our source path configurations. Here's a snippet of what I've implemented using this GIF right here. In a YAML file, we're going to specify the sources, the name of the particular reference of our source. Think of it as like an alias for the database and schema. We add our database and schema. Imagine that's like QtDB, and schema is what I call it, niceSchema. And then the names coming down thereafter would be our table names. And so let's not look at the dynamic GIF right here. If you want to reference that later on, you can. But let's just look at that source of the snippet of what's being displayed in that GIF right here. So here is the name customer alias for our table references that we'll be using in this dbt functionality using the Gingit template. And this alias is associated to our database and schema, packing it all together in that alias, which is very convenient. So that way we don't have to type this out over and over again. This database and schema, by the way, is from a Snowflake trial, so just keep that in mind. If you're you are or not using these specifications, or if you're interested in the data I'm using. So I'm Snowflake trial database. And then so we have the database schema and then our table names as well. And then here, if you notice, we have that customer table name, but we also have a couple other table names as well. Here are some tips when going through and configuring your schema for data sources. Why do you say receive an error like this? The selector, etc., does not match any nodes and will be ignored. This particular error is just because of either our profiles YAML doesn't have the right configuration, so just ensuring that the configuration is there would enable your DBT execution to occur. There are other things like, why is my schema like dev underscore etc. table name? Well, remember that in our profiles.yaml file, we specified our target to be a dev specification. And we specified our target is dev, right? And then in dev configuration, we specify the table creation to be dev underscore whatever that particular naming convention is. So just keep that in mind. In my case, I put rolling average as the naming convention. So everything in my Snowflake database through materialization of these table names will be dev underscore rolling average as a schema name, and then the associated table created thereafter. And then how do I access all these tables in a fluid manner without facing too many admin issues? Since I'm on the Snowflake trial, I'm using sysadmin, so do keep that in mind. Great, so that's it for our source configuration. In the next video of this part of base and raw extraction, we'll be going in through instantiating our base tables, so definitely stay tuned for that.